Hello and welcome to another video of a new series that I'm gonna start today where we're gonna cover endgames. On this video we're covering specifically king endgames, and we're gonna go over some of the most important endgames, required endgames that everybody should know. You might know some of them already, but I'm sure there will be some that will be interesting and new, some new concepts that hopefully you will pick up in this video. I do teach these endgames to my students as a way to warm up, to start up understanding key endgames. And of course, if you wanna keep going and learn more, that's great, but these are almost required and for everybody to know by heart. And without further ado, let's get going. We're gonna start with the most basic endgame in chess, which is the king pawn versus king. And this endgame, you have to know it by heart. You should be able to do this even if you're sleeping, or in your dreams. You have this position where the opposition is everything that matters, and whose turn is it. I'm not going to cover too much the concept of opposition because it would take a long time. But the main idea of the concept of opposition is that if it's black to move, white has the opposition. If it's white to move, black has the opposition. So basically on king endgames, if it's your turn to move, plenty of time is actually bad. So we are gonna see some opposition samples and how this works in endgames. But basically the idea is that you need to practice this endgame. I recommend to practice this endgame against the computer. You can use any of the websites, chess.com, Lichess, and so on, where you can set up the position and just play it out and learn it, how to make a draw with black and when it is a draw, and how to win with white. So I'm just gonna go over one line because it would take a long time again. So in this case it's white to move, and that is why this position is a draw. The king moves to anywhere. I'm just gonna sit in front of that king. I'm gonna not let that king get basically one more step forward, because then that will be a winning game for white. And then of course eventually white will run out of moves. I just follow you, and eventually you will push the pawn. One of the concepts of these endgames is that if the king is not in front of the pawn, then the game is a draw. So if you can ever get any position like this, then you're in an official draw position. So I'm just gonna keep going with this line, and eventually the key move is that once you get down to the 8th rank, you have to make sure you know when to go here and when to go here. The easiest way to remember this is to basically always stay in the center of the pawn, so on the column of the pawn, and only move left or right whenever the white king aligns itself to the pawn. So I would just go up and down on the same column in the center, as long as you don't allow me to do so anymore. And when that happens, that's when I go left or right depending on where your king is going. If it's here, if he's on f6, I go to f8, and if he's on d6, I go to d8. For example, I'm just gonna keep doing the same thing. Finally you move there, then I move left, and then if you go there, where do I go? Well, I know I can actually go either way, but I'm just gonna keep going up and down. I could have gone here too, right? It's the same thing. Stay in the center until the king lines up, and then boom, after that I go right. I would just follow you, and at some point, well, we're gonna get tired of moving back and forward, and what's gonna happen? You do the same concept here. White will push the pawn, and for example in this case I would just sit there, e7, king e8, and this is the end of the game, where either white gives me the pawn by moving away, or you can defend it, but that will be a stalemate. So this endgame, everybody should know this endgame by heart. Like I said, practice it enough where you can do this immediately without even thinking. That's the goal on this endgame. Now we're gonna go to the next one, which is actually the reverse of what we just saw, because now we can actually win this endgame with white. In the previous one, it was white to move, and so the endgame is a draw because, well, black had the position. In this case, it is black to move, so white wins this endgame extremely easy. One of the biggest concepts of king endgames, and in general for any type of endgames, is that a lot of the time if you want to win, you actually need to go to the opposite side of whatever your opponent's king is. So this king endgame is actually the basics of that idea, which is basically you go right, I'm actually going left and up. If you go left, well, take a guess, I'm going right right and up. And this is, again, a basic concept that you're going to see in other endgames where we're talking about distraction and so on. Now here, again, I'm not going to go very deep into this. You can practice this by yourself. But the main idea is that we're always going to keep an eye on gaining the opposition and as we go forward in this endgame. So you see, this is a good opportunity for me to improve my position once again, get more opposition, and now black has to move away again, and then again I go left top in this position, and bang, I just won the game because I'm going to be able to promote that pawn. So this is the way to win. There could be other variations. Black can play many different ways, but it does not matter. This is considered a winning endgame for white. Very easy. Boom, you won. So the concept again, if your king is in front of the pawn, number one, and it is your opponent's turn to move, and you're sitting in front of each other, that's when you know you're immediately winning. So now we're gonna go to an exception of those rules. So one of the first things that we're gonna talk about, well, we're gonna talk about is that, well, you know, because of the way that opposition works, that in some cases, basically you won't have the opposition. So in this case, on the first endgame that we saw, this endgame is also about opposition because, well, we're gonna both try to win the opposition. I'm white. I know that if I get my king in front, it's always going to be the best decision. So if you have a position like this, the first step for you is get that king as far away in front of your pawn as possible. And here is better than here, and here is better than here, as high up as you can, basically. So that's why it doesn't really matter where you put your king, but definitely not here, because you want to get as farther as possible in front of the pawn. So we're gonna go forward. Black actually keeps something that we're gonna see later. It's called long distance opposition, basically keeping odd number of squares in between the kings, and that is how you win the opposition from far as well. There's 5, and as white goes up, black keeps it again. It's at 3 now, and then finally we're gonna go 1. So who has the position? Well, it is black, the one that has the position. Now, unfortunately for black, and this is why it's so important to get that king as far away as possible, white has something that in chess is called tempo, and we have a tempo. We have a waste of a move, because remember, we want black to move, and that's when in this game, and the key is to go e3. Now we can apply the same concept or the same way of winning that we did in the previous one. And you notice again that a lot of the time we're gonna be going back to those endgames, to those basic king endgames, king pawn versus king, and then boom, we now win because, well, we just gonna be careful not to lose the opposition. For example, here we lost the position, but who cares, right? Because we still have that pawn move, gives up the opposition again, and we're back exactly to the previous game. Now there is an exception to the rule of pawns, and it is that basically if you have an endgame like this, we have this position where you know, I actually saw this happening in a live game against masters, and there's only one move here that loses. And it is the move king d2. I mean, once again, it is white to move here, and if you go king d2 is the only place that gives black the opposition, because I'm taking the pawn. So there is a concept in chess that is called triangulation, and it is another concept that you need to know. And you can search more difficult versions of this, but this is the most basic one of them. We want to get to this position here whenever black takes the pawn. So that's why the move is king e1, king d1, anywhere around this, but do not touch that square. So if I go king e1 and you take, that's what I want. So what I just did there is the most basic idea of triangulation. Triangulation is basically wasting a tempo or wasting time to get to where you want, so that is your opponent's turn. That concept is huge in king endgames. So like in this case, king e1, I can go king e3, we're gonna go around, and I'm just gonna try to always trick you to hopefully make you go here, but you're not. You're just gonna stay around anywhere, and then only go here when we can get to that position. Now we're gonna go to another exception. So of these endgames, and this one is a very important, very important endgame to remember. And basically, what you need to remember is that if your king is in front of the pawn, we already said that. Before in the previous endgame, the pawn was on the 4th rank, and if the king was in front, it depended black was in this case was winning if white if it was white's turn and if black has the opposition. So if you were in front of the pawn, you also needed the opposition. There's an exception to that rule, and is that when the pawn is on the 5th rank, and notice that I'm saying the 5th rank, not the 4 or 5 rank. The 5th rank, meaning from black, for example, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the number 4 rank is actually the 5th rank for black. And the king is in front, you are winning no matter what. These are things that are good to just know by heart. Again, remember, it's just one little memory thing. And you know that if you manage to put your king in front of the pawn, if you manage to get your king in front of the pawn and you have the pawn on the 5th rank, you're already winning. Now, how do you win? Well, it depends. For example, if it's black, well, we know now is that if it's white to move, it's easy because you just move, let's say king c1. Sorry. If it's white to move, you go king c1, I go king e2. I always go to the opposite side. Then I promote. So you would think that, okay, wait, what if I go king c3? I still have the opposition. How's this winning? Well, in this case, it's because you just push your pawn forward. And unfortunately for white, this position is actually white's turn, and they have to get out of the promotion square. And then black wins because you have to go out. Now, if you don't, what else can you do? I mean, there's nothing else you can do. I'm just going... you cannot go that way. There's nothing you can do, and of course we win the game. So it's important to remember this exception because it's the only case where you can win, even if you don't have the opposition. I'm talking about when the pawn, obviously the pawn was on the 3rd rank, also wins, but it is completely winning. Now we move on to another. All of these are important, knowledge base and memory base endgames that you need to know, so that whenever you look at a more complex endgame, you will actually understand it. Now here, this is another very basic idea. You can see it on the title, why wins distraction. So the concept here is distraction. So why is distraction so important here? Well, the idea of distraction is that sometimes you won't be able to win by using your pass pawn. In fact, plenty of times in endgames, you don't win by using the pass pawn that you have or the extra pawn that you have. Instead, you use that pawn as a distraction to something. It could be, in this case, is a king. There's nothing else to distract. But in some other cases, it could be a knight, it could be a bishop, it could be a rook. So you are just basically trying to use this pawn so that this king stays busy while you come get that pawn, and then you get a much better version of this same endgame that we looked up in the previous one, where this king won't be here, it will be all the way here. Now, to understand the concept, if we just keeps playing here and we just kind of go forward, what's going to happen here, if we just forget about, if we kind of divide the chess board on half, and this is divided, and we only have this pawn, we know this endgame is a draw. There is no way for us to improve here, because we know black will use the technique of drawing. Here, then that will be a draw. So what do? This is why we don't actually push it all the way, because we want this king to waste more time to come get that pawn, so we just decide to go left. And then we give up the pawn, we distracted the king, and then this is a 10 times better version of any of the other endgames we saw, because, well, this king is not able to get to the promotion square. So now I'm just pushing, moving away, and then I just won the game. Very easy, right? So this concept and idea of distraction, we're gonna repeat it. We're gonna see it again in some of the next games that we're gonna see. This is the most basic idea, but very important as well. We're gonna go on into the next one. And here we see another idea of distraction. Now this one has a little bit of a kick on it, and is that we are actually even. We don't have an extra pawn, but we do have a huge advantage. Black is completely winning here because we have something that's called the far away pawn, or the pawn that's farther away from the other pawn structure. What is the other pawn structure? That can change depending on the position, but in general, is basically the other side of the game. Since this pawn is here pushing, then this will not be the other pawn structure, because that's the pawn that's creating the distraction. The other pawn structure will be the one on the left. So why am I winning? Is because this king, the white king, is gonna have to come and get the pawn on the rook's column, while I'm getting the pawn on the bishop column or the c file. Who's gonna be closer when that happens to this other pawn structure? Is going to be the black king. I am 2 steps faster than the white king. So basically all I have to do is make sure I don't lose the pawn for free, and eventually I'm able to just say, things are gonna lock up. This is very typical in endgames. We both push pawns, and there will be a point where nobody can push anything else, and at that point is when you start making improvements. Right now this king is gonna eventually have to come I can force you to do it by giving you the pawn up. But just to show the purpose of this, you notice that we are 2 steps, or at least 1.5 steps closer, because we had the farther away pawn. And of course, who wins this game is the one who gets to take pawns faster, and so black wins the game. So distraction doesn't necessarily have to be or doesn't necessarily have to happen only when you are up 1 pawn. It could also be you're even, but you have the better pawn. You have the farther away pawn, and that's why this is important to remember. We're gonna go to another one, and this is just a important pawn structure for you to know. There are pawn structures in chess that can control a king, and that is extremely important for you to know, because when you have these sort of pawn structures, what happens is that the black king or the white king or any of the kings cannot really move away. The only way you can win an endgame is by using your king or using your pawns, right? But if your king cannot be activated because it's stuck, like in this case, both kings are stuck, then you can never make progress and the game ends in a draw. This is a very important pawn structure, because it's one pawn structure where you don't need the defense of your king to not lose the pawn. The main reason for that is that, well, if I take this pawn, then this pawn is gone, right? And the same thing happens if black takes the pawn. So what's going to happen in this position? Well, we both are just going to sit there and not do anything, and the game will that be in a draw. So when you have a pawn, you have a king that's not able to make it on time to protect the pawn, you can use your own pawns by setting up these pawn structures to make a draw. The next one is going to be a similar, well, this is just a proof of what I just said. In this case, black, though, is the one that doesn't have that pawn structure set up. And then black cannot never take this pawn. So we have all the time in the world. We're just going to go grab this pawn, come back, and then just win, because we have 2 pawns versus a king. I mean, we don't have to go. I'm just going to go over very quickly on this. But basically, you just bring your king, and eventually you will promote. You got too many pawns. So that's a very easy endgame. The next one is a similar idea of important pawn structures to learn. We talked about the 2 connected pass pawn structure, how one defends the other one, and the base can never be taken. Now we have another setup, and is that in a case like this, when you have 2 pawns that are separated by 1 column, you can also learn this idea that's playing the move pawn c5. And the moment that you play the move pawn c5, you notice that we have a similar case now. This king can never take this pawn, because this pawn will be gone, will just be pushed, and it will be gone. And the same thing happens, it can happen multiple times. We just have to be aware. Well, our goal is to get that pawn and then bring the king to help. And of course, when black tries to go grab this pawn, we do the same technique. We go a5, king c6, and then boom, c6. So we're basically waiting to see when is this king going to either, get this pawn or the other one, and we push the pawn that is needed. So I want you to pay attention to this, and these are the pawn structures that can help you become a better endgame player. So you need to look at this, you need to remember this, memorize it, and learn the pattern, how these 2 pawns work together to stop the king from getting both of them. If you, for example, start doing this the wrong time, you go king h3, this is a draw now. You don't have time to bring the king, and it's a draw. So it is important that you know this and how to stop your opponent's king from activating or from getting your pawns. Now, this is a winning endgame thanks to that pawn structure. Now, we're going to go to another one here. And this is the reason I'm putting this is one is because it's one of the first endgames I learned to practice opposition. It's a classic. It's not an endgame that you're going to get probably ever in your life. There has been very few in history, actually, people who got this. But the idea is basically to learn how to gain tempos, or how to count to gain the opposition in a position like this. So basically, the main big question here in this endgame is that you need to figure out if you do 1 step or 2 steps, and that's something that you always gonna have in some endgames. You need to count, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to win the opposition, and the only way to do so is by calculating. So and of course, in this case, for example, well, you can more or less count, but the way to win this will be by playing the move g3. So if you go g4, let's see, g4 king h8, you notice how black ends up kind of getting the opposition. So when we go g7, king g8 is a draw. So we want to be able to get to this position so that is black to move, and that's why the move is g3. Black goes king h8, g4, king g8, g5, and we are actually back to that original endgame that we saw, one of the endgames we saw earlier. And this is a win. Again, you're not gonna have it, but it just show you an example of how important every move matters in the endgame. 1 pawn difference, one is a draw, this one is a win, right? So back to the next one. This is actually a very famous endgame, and similar to this endgame, I believe it might have been the same endgame, maybe with different colors, happening again between Magnus and Alireza. And Alireza actually lost this endgame. He like completely collapsed, and in time scramble he made a move with 2 seconds, and he just blundered and lost an endgame that is super easy to draw. This is about long distance opposition and just opposition in general. Basically, black is a draw because white can never play f4, no? But the one condition for this endgame to make a draw is that black needs to stay with the opposition at all times. If black loses the opposition, the game is a win. For example, you go king e8, well, you lose the game right now. Not only that, but also I'm able to get the pawn, right? So this is too easy, but also I get the opposition. Remember, the distance opposition is whenever I make a move and I'm the one creating the odd square. So there's a separation between odd numbers of squares in between the kings, and in this case white is the one creating that. So for example, king e7 is actually the only move for black to survive here, to stay on the odd numbers of squares. Anything else, you lose. So and the game should be very easy. You basically have to stay on the opposition wherever white goes, and we know that if white plays f4, we take, and then this position is just a draw, like we have seen before, because the pawn is at the same level as the king. The king is not in front of the pawn, so there's not even a point to calculate or play this when you know the king is not in front, because, well, there's no it's a draw. It's a theoretical draw, right? So here at this point, after king e6, well, if you keep doing this, we can play around, but at the end of the day, we're just gonna keep going until basically we both, I guess white is gonna make, I'm just following you wherever you are, wherever you go, and the game is a draw. So yeah, so this is a good one because you're down a pawn and you have this lateral idea, also this far away long distance opposition, and it's just a good example that you can check that game, Magnus Alireza. I would definitely suggest, and just see what he did, because he lost this game. And now we're gonna go to the next one. This is a ridiculous example just to show you that rook pawns are the worst pawns out there. So never have rook pawns if you want to win an endgame. King endgames are you know, they're usually, when you're up a pawn, you'll win, except for this rook pawn endgames. Of course, this is the exception that, okay, this king is far away enough, not on the corner, and here then I can play maybe king g7. If your king was on e7, then I can push, obviously. But as long as this king gets to f8, actually, anywhere in these 3 places, the game is a draw, because white cannot stop me from getting to the corner, and then I just sit there. There's no way for you to kick me out of there. Is a draw, theoretical draw. So good one to know as well. Here I'm going to talk about pawn breaks, and sometimes this is not very typical, but sometimes you're going to have pawn breaks that can make a big difference in a game, and pawn breaks are very important. You need to know, learn, have a good feeling for how to do them. But basically, in this case, there's a famous tactic here where white is completely winning, because white has the pawns that are way more way farther away from black. Black's, you know, black is very far away from promoting. We are a little closer, so white has this beautiful pawn break, b6, and the idea is that, well, if you my goal here is to create a passed pawn by using a very cool tactic. If you take with the c pawn, then my only chance of creating a passed pawn will be here. So I go a6, give you another pawn. You have to take it, and then I just promote. And of course, because I'm 2 steps from promotion, you have from, like, I don't know, 5 steps from promotion, black loses. If you take with the a pawn, you do the opposite. You give up the c pawn, create the passed pawn, bang, you won. So pawn breaks are very important, and this is just one example of it. We're gonna see a couple more as we go through these endgames. And now I want to just mention this endgame. We're gonna talk about this one, I know, later. These 2 very famous endgames by Rubinstein. I'm gonna offer you to go look at them. But first, let's take a look at this one. This is a tempo example and also a pawn break example for you to learn. So we have this king endgame that we know black should be somehow winning because you're up a pawn, right? If you're up a pawn in endgame, you're 99% of the time winning, very rarely, especially when there are more pawns involved. If it was a king pawn versus king, but it's the opposite. Most of the time they're draw. Up a pawn when there's more pawns, then that's probably a win because you're always gonna be able to create distraction with the extra pawn and go to the other side and win. But here, white has a very interesting position where white is kind of sitting, not letting black make improvement. There's a beautiful move here though, is to play the move pawn b5. Bang. A pawn break. Now, why does that work? Well, we're giving up a pawn, right? Pawn takes pawn. And now we have the amazing move king b6. And I want you to look at this and understand the concept of this. That is a tempo concept. We talked about tempos, right? When we we kind of waste time. It could be also used as triangulation, another way of kind of losing tempos or waste time. So that is our opponent's turn. For us in king endgames, a lot of the time, it is very important for us to make our opponent move so that they gave us the space that we need so that we can push forward. In this case, a very, very important example because white has no other extra pawn moves. We don't have any other extra pawn moves. So what do? We give up the pawn and then we force white to get away or separate itself from the defense of this pawn. And what I just did, I just made a huge improvement in my position because I cleared out one more pawn and then I trade it off. So that means I'm closer to getting the distraction I need. And an endgame like this will be very easy to win because of the same concept that we just talked about. Remember, we're not going to win by using that pawn. We're actually going to win by giving it up. The only reason we're pushing this point is so that we get our king closer to the actual winning pawns, which are these ones on this side. And that's how we win this endgame. Now, if these pawns were not there, if these pawns were gone, then this endgame was probably gonna, it is a draw. It was gonna be a draw. So we actually win not because of the passed pawn, but we win because we got distraction. So this is a nice little break. I'm winning a tempo, and it's the only way to win. I actually had this game from a student, and I believe he played king d6, and I think the game ended up in a win, but it was a lot more difficult because now the king comes in, and you have to. So it's a little tricky. So this move is beautiful, b5. The next game is another tempo. Set up, and actually I believe this happened in the game somehow. This actually happened in the game, and the game is a draw now. This is a weird tempo where nobody can make improvements, because if you go up, you lose. If black goes up, you lose. If white goes up, you lose. So what do? You don't actually go up ever. You have to kind of sit there and wait and be patient, and then that will end up the game in a draw, because anytime you go up, boom, I get the tempo myself, and then I kick you, and then I win the pawn, and then I create the passed pawn that creates a distraction. So what happens is that, well, if you go king c4, I do the same. I go myself king b6, and then I kick you, and you're not gonna have time to go catch these pawns. Too slow. My pawn is too fast. So your best shot is to kind of sit there and let me improve little by little, getting closer to my pawns and win again. So great. So again, a great thing about tempos is that this is again another sort of triangulation, right? Because it's almost like you need your opponent to be moving, no? And that's the key to most of endgames. And that's why a lot of the time on endgames, for example, if you had a position where this pawn was there and not here, this will benefit black a lot, because then you have an extra move that you can use to gain a tempo back. So so if this pawn, for example, was on h7, let's say the pawn was here, I can easily go king b6, even if I lose the tempo, because who cares? If my pawn was here, then my move would be pawn h6 or pawn h5, and then I get the tempo back, right? Always consider this thing about tempos whenever king, anytime you can save a pawn move on a king endgame is huge, because that might be the difference between a draw and a win. So now this is an example that it is a draw. But just to show you a little more of a realistic example of an endgame, this is about king in the center, position, and more important than anything, finding a way to get that king into your opponent's pawn structure. We know based on position that if, for example, if this king goes right, if we want to win this endgame, our only chance is to maybe go left and then try to crash this pawn. If you go left, we hope that we have a way to get in and attack the pawns on the right, and so on, right? So, but how do we do that? Well, black is going to try to stop us. Black is not going to want to get allow our king to go on the right. Another thing that's important here is to notice that the white king is actually better. So if anybody has a chance of winning this endgame, it is white, because we are one step more into the center, into the space than black. You see, black is on the 3rd rank. We're on the 4th rank. We're doing we're on the 4th rank. It's a lot better for the 6th rank, sorry, for white. So, but a very important move, at least to try out here, is c4. And now is when we start playing, pawn moves, and we can make some pawn moves, and black will make some pawn moves. The reality, though, is that what do? We just kind of lock it up. Black will never play here. If you do that, you lose immediately. So, but black has this pawn placed very well. An endgame like this, if there are many ways to make a draw here. But for example, if I go h4, as long as I go here and I don't let you in, is a draw. So when you're playing defense or attacking, you have to think about this idea, this concept of, hey, I don't want to let my opponent get into my pawn structures the way that I can guarantee a draw. Here I think g5 would have also been a draw, because, well, as long as I don't give you, but it's a little risky, because what if I go g4, h6? I think this is the time where, well, now I'm running out of moves. You have to go forward. Notice that I'm not going here because I lose. If I go king f3, for example, this is a great example of a triangulation, right? Once again, king f3, we're kind of in the same spot that we were in the previous example, where black can never really go to e5. Because if you go to e5, then I get the opposition. Well, you could go, it's a draw. You end up moving again here, because if you go here, you lose, actually. Now I'm getting in left or right, depending what you allow me to do. That's why here I go king f3. If I go king e3, black wins. And just like that, things switch from losing to winning, thanks to the opposition, thanks to the fact that we run out of moves. Now black is the one that is in. So this is what king endgames are about. It's about figuring out the calculation, the tactic, to make sure that it's always like your opponent's turn. Is your opponent the one pushing down or going backwards on space, and then you are the one pushing him away? So for example, this is a very tough move to make sometimes. A lot of people will make the blunder of thinking, oh, I need to stay in the center. No, you don't, because you don't want to give up space. Only now is when you can push the king away. Here again, black can go here. And I think this endgame would just be a draw, because basically black will be around this, but never be on the actual placement. Same for white. White would never go here. Now, hopefully that makes sense. And this is a very, this is actually, I'm taking this one also from one of my students who, I don't remember if he was black or white, but it was a very interesting endgame, because black here is completely winning. And it is black to move. So I'm gonna switch it, because it's black to move, and then we're gonna switch it back to white. So it is black to move, and this is about how to find a way for the black king to get in. If you look at this, for example, as a way to get in, could potentially work. But of course, if I go here, I don't think I'm gonna let you. I'm just gonna go king d3, right? My goal as somebody defending a position is to not let your king in. I know as long as that's the case, I'm okay, or at least I can survive. My student, or whoever was playing my student, made a horrendous move in this position, and then he was actually lost right after this move. But how do you get in? There's a very fast way of getting in, and that is the beautiful move h5. So a pawn break that basically creates a hole, a way in for black. So h5, bang, is the best move. G takes h, G takes h, and now nobody can stop you from going in, because this white king, as you can see, has no way in on this side. And if you don't have that way, what are you gonna do? Well, you're gonna have to play passive, trying to protect this pawn. But then what happens when you're protecting this pawn? I distract you again. The concept of distraction with the pass pawn that I have. This is a possible move, but I also have just f5, sorry, c4. This is an easy win, because what happens? Well, we do the same technique that we talked about before. We give up the pawn to create another pass pawn that is faster, because your king is now able to catch up. And even if you were catching up, I would just push my pawn and then come with the king, get this pawn, and it will create the same issue for white. So once again, we're actually winning using the distraction, combine pawn breaks, we combine with how to get your king to attack your opponent's pawns, etc. Now the funny thing is that this would have been the way to win for black, right? Well, guess what? Now black made a blunder, and we're gonna switch it now for white, and then my student played, or somebody played a5. And now it's funny, because now things turn. Now I'm the one who can create the break, that can give me the entrance faster than my opponent. So the best move for here, if you want to make this pawn move, you know what the best move is to play the move a6. You need to have this move, because here's the deal. If you play the move a4, I still have a6, and that keeps this king away from getting in, which is everything I want on an endgames. I don't want my opponent's king to get in, right? But no, somehow you have this instinct that you want to push pawns forward as much as possible, because you feel like, hey, I need those pawns to be closer to promotion. But it's a horrible move, because when I play now a4, you have no way to stop me now from going king c4, because guess what? If you try, then I will again give you that distraction that I need, and then if somebody can win, or well, I don't know, this is actually very tricky. It might just be a draw, but I think white wins by one tempo, because I'm one move away, and bang, you win. You see, this is how bad endgames can be. I mean, they can go from draw to winning to losing in one run pawn move. And a lot of that is based on concepts. You have to calculate, but you also have to apply concepts like don't let your opponent's king active. Don't give out weaknesses. Don't let your opponent in, right? So here we saw two cases of both players letting each other in, and I don't think that happened actually in the game. So another case, a similar position. We have this situation where once again we won in, but there is no way in. Black is doing a great job controlling, but we do have a beautiful move here. We have a 5, and then another example of how to improve your king by using your pawns. You're basically just going in, pushing that king away, and the more you push your opponent's king, that means the closer you are to these pawns and the farther is him from your pawn, so you're just basically winning. This is a case of a position. Black has to move to the left or to the right or whatever. It doesn't matter, because I'm just winning. I mean, there might be a little trick here you have to watch out. There's a pass pawn, but I don't think it works, because this, you can catch it and then now you use distraction, and you just win the game. It's very straightforward. F5, beautiful move to win the game. And now the last two games that I'm not going to touch, because they're classics and you just have to spend some time looking at them. I'm just gonna mention them, and so you can find these games online. If you Google Rubinstein, these names, they will come up. You have this important classic game from 1909, one of the best king endgames ever, where white played rook c1, rook takes rook, king takes rook, and of course we're trying to find king activity, and the key plan here for you to know and to learn is how Rubinstein, who was way ahead of his era, he decided to go and put the king on h3 to make this king passive on g1, and he won one of the most best endgames ever, and you can see it was a master class of activity, king activity versus king passivity, but also the way that he created a way to actually end up winning on this side. He pushed the king all the way here, but then he actually ended up winning on this side. It's just a beautiful endgame, which is some sort of distraction. So the other one is a similar idea, actually. Is the same player Rubinstein against somebody else, and you can start basically on move 66, because that's where the king endgame begin, and a very similar thing. You have this active king versus passive king, because, well, look at where this king is. It's past the 5th. It's in the 5th rank, but basically you cannot win a lot of the time by using the one area where your king is, but instead you're trying to somehow create some sort of distraction or some of activity, so you can end up going to the right. This took a long time, but again, I want you to find this game, Brinkman versus Rubinstein. If you learn all of these endgames that I talked to about today, you're gonna be in a good start for your king endgame knowledge, and I really hope you enjoy and practice these endgames, know them well, practice them enough where you're never gonna forget. This was this was important for me as a player, as a strong player, and I think it's been important for my students to learn these endgames well. It makes you an overall better player. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and next I will be doing a rook endgame similar to what I just did today. You guys have a great day, and I will see you until next time.